Hi everyone, and welcome back to Story Time with Miss Leah. I went outside today and I picked some of the flowers that are growing wild all around us. And so I've got a nice little bouquet that I made. So I wanted to tell you about a couple of these. I think this one is dead nettle that has bloomed. And then we've got some violets and some mock strawberry, and those are the two that I want to talk to you about. I've got some kind of white violets there, and then the purple ones, and then the yellow ones are the mock strawberry. So let's talk first about this mock strawberry. So the strawberry plants, wild strawberries or even strawberries like what you buy in the grocery store, their flowers are white with a little yellow center. And of course, you've probably all had strawberries because they're one of my favorite fruits and probably one of yours. And they are tasty and very sweet. Well, these mock strawberries are sometimes called Indian strawberries. They also have tiny red berries, and that is where they get their name. But if you eat the mock strawberries, they are not as sweet as the wild strawberries. And that's why they're kind of like a false or fake strawberry. But they do have flavor and they are edible. They kind of taste a little bit like watermelon, actually. And I have tried them and they're okay. Not anything you'd want to eat buckets and buckets full like regular strawberries, but they're all right. And so they have these yellow flowers, and so they're pretty and they are blooming all over the place right now if you keep an eye out low to the ground. And then these purple ones and these white ones are violets, and they are actually the Illinois state flower. So that is one that you should know. And I just learned that a serving of the purple part of a violet actually has more vitamin C than an orange. So it actually can be pretty good for you. And it's a favorite food of rabbits and mice and wild turkeys. And you can make jelly out of it or lemonade or other things, which I told you about a few days ago. So I might be trying that violet jelly now that I know how good they are for you. So those are just a few things that are growing outside. I wonder if there's anything new that you have noticed. Spring, a lot of the trees have started to grow their leaves and their flowers are starting to die off. It's getting more and more green outside. The grass is very green in our yard. But there's still some flowers that are out there. And spring is my favorite time to look for wildflowers, but you have to keep looking because some of them don't last very long. All right, and as usual, I have a poem to read, and this one is a story. I like when there are poems that are also stories. And it is called The Old Sailor, and it's kind of a silly story, but it has a little lesson in there. So let's see if you can get the lesson. And it is by A.A. Milne from the same book we read yesterday, Now We Are Six. There was once an old sailor my grandfather knew, who had so many things which he wanted to do, that whenever he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't because of the state he was in. He was shipwrecked and lived on an island for weeks, and he wanted a hat and he wanted some breeks, and he wanted some nets or a line and some hooks for the turtles and things which you read of in books. And thinking of this, he remembered a thing which he wanted for water, and that was a spring. And he thought that to talk he'd look for and keep, if he found it, a goat or some chickens and sheep. Then, because of the weather, he wanted a hut with a door to come in by, which opened and shut, with a jerk which was useful if snakes were about, and a very strong lock to keep the savages out. He began on the fish hooks, and when he'd begun, he decided he couldn't because of the sun. So he knew what he ought to begin with, and that was to find or to make a large sun-stopping hat. He was making the hat with some leaves from a tree when he thought, I'm as hot as a body can be, and I've nothing to take for my terrible thirst, so I'll look for a spring, and I'll look for it first. Then he thought as he started, oh dear, I'll be lonely tomorrow with nobody here. So he made in his notebook a couple of notes. I must first find some chickens. No, I mean goats. He had just seen a goat, which he knew by the shape, when he thought, "But I must have a boat for escape." But a boat means a sail, which means needles and thread, so I better sit down and make needles instead. He began on a needle, but thought as he worked that if this was an island where savages lurked, sitting safe in his hut, he'd have nothing to fear, whereas now they might suddenly breathe in his ear. So he thought of his hut, and he thought of his boat, and his hat and his breeks and his chickens and goats, and of the hooks for his food and the spring for his thirst. But he never could think which one he ought to do first. And so, in the end, he did nothing at all, but basked on a shingle wrapped up in a shawl, and I think it was dreadful the way he behaved. He did nothing but basking until he was saved. So sometimes I'm a little bit like that sailor, and I have so many ideas in my head that I never get around to doing any of them. So sometimes you just got to pick something and go with it, and then you will start to get things done. Well, Chapter 2 of Miss Hickory. If you remember yesterday, we learned about our new friend in our new book, Miss Hickory, who lives in a corncob house under a lilac bush. And she lives in town outside of a family's home, but she's found out from the crow that the family is going to be moving away. And so she needs to decide what she's going to do, because it might be kind of hard for her to live through the winter without the family to help her. So this chapter is called Moon Before Snowfall. "Oh, it's a good day to finish my canning," Miss Hickory said to herself, as she built up a wood fire and started toward the forest for berries. It was a beautiful day, crisp, but with warm sunshine that made her forget Crow's warning visit. Crow was so ready with raucous chit-chatter that she did not take him too seriously. He always has something to say, and likes to hear himself say it, she reminded herself as she put a small rush basket over her arm and stepped briskly off on her twig feet. Although the torches that the goldenrod had lighted along the October road towered above Miss Hickory's head, she found her way easily in and out among them. Their brightness made her feel happy. Farther on, the purple asters made royal canopy beneath which she walked proudly until she came to the edge of the woods. She left the road and was at once in the deep green of the pines. Miss Hickory's nose was as keen as a fox. The smell of pine trees never failed to go to her head. She could not explain why, but when she was alone in the woods, sniffing rich earth, wandering through the lacy lanes of ferns, and smelling the pines, she felt like another person. She wished that she had had time to dig up one of the tiny new hemlock trees to set it out at the front of her corncob house, an idea that she had treasured for some time. But the cold of the woods, now that she had left the sunny road, made her realize that there would not be many more berrying days. So she knelt down, dug away the leaves that already were making a thick covering on the earth. It always surprised her to feel how warm the earth kept under the leaves, even on a cold day. She dug them aside here and there, uncovering the vines that she wanted. It was as delightful to thrust her twig arms up to the elbows in the warm tangle as to sniff the woods. She began to pick the bright red berries and fill her basket. There was no time to lose, she knew. Cock Pheasant lived close by and was a famous berry picker. Checkerberries first. They stood up straight in plain sight on their stems and could be picked fast. But for preserving and storing away in her acorn jugs for the winter, Miss Hickory doesn't want to turn. My page doesn't want to turn. Oh, here's a picture of her picking some berries. Miss Hickory knew that checkerberry preserves needed a good deal of sweetening, more honey than she had been able to save that season. So she picked a few checkerberry leaves. They were tasty and crisp, served with a cup of tea. Next, the partridge berries that ripened close to the ground, little crimson balls and twins, two growing side by side, secretly on their low-lying running vine. Miss Hickory canned partridge berries whole in their own sweet juice, As she finished gathering berries and started home with her filled basket, she remembered something that Cock Pheasant had once told her. "When the partridge berries are ripe," Cock Pheasant had said, "it is only 2 full moons before the first snowfall." When she came home, Miss Hickory saw that the entire front of her house was covered by the fat, brindled haunches of Mr. T. Willard Brown. He was enjoying the sunshine that trickled down through the bare lilac bushes and waving his long tail to and fro like a banner. He was a wandering barn cat, a hunter of renown, but Miss Hickory liked him. Mr. T. Willard Brown lived a secret life closer to the ground than did Crow. He was a newsy man and willing to share his stories. "You are late this morning," she told him. "The milking was late," he explained. "I can't start the day with my regular breakfast of a dish of warm milk, right from the cow." Miss Hickory set down her basket of berries, came close, and looked sharply into Mr. T. Willard Brown's eyes. "That would have been a better story, my friend," she said, "if you had washed your face before you told it. There is a feather sticking right out of your mouth." She flicked it off. "Oh, my ears and whiskers!" he exclaimed in mock chagrin. "However did I get into feathers so early this morning? Now, if it had been tea time here at the old place, and I had dropped in and someone had urged me to take a nap on one of those soft feather pillows," he purred loudly to cover his embarrassment. "Never mind," she said. "We all know your habits, Mr. T, and I am glad to see you this morning. Crow called a few days ago." "Oh, don't speak of him," Mr. T. Willard Brown spat. "I wouldn't eat a crow on a wager. The last time I saw Crow, he walked right towards me and said a bad word, and I spat on him." "If you ate crow occasionally, you might be a better man," she told him. "What I was about to say, when you interrupted me, was that Crow spoke of the family as planning to leave Hillsboro for the winter. He said that Great Granny Brown was thinking of living at the Women's City Club on Beacon Hill, Boston, and Anne was going to school there. Nothing but hearsay on his part, of course." Mr. T. Willard Brown arose, stretched, and yawned. "Not a plan nor hearsay, my love," he told Miss Hickory, "but the truth. They have gone." She listened without words, her eyes full of terror. He continued, "You ought to get out more, Miss Hickory. All summer you have stayed here under the lilacs, only going to the woods for berries, or on Sunday when Jack in the pulpit preached. If you had gone around to the front of the house lately, you would have seen trucks coming down from the attic. Trunks coming down from the attic." "Gone," she breathed at last. Now she knew that it was true. She would not let him see her cry. Instead, she stamped her twig feet. "It's all your fault, Mr. T. They had to leave to get away from you, scratching on doors and purring in the kitchen for milk. You are only a cat with a cat's ways. I shall tell all of Hillsboro that your given name is Tippy, because you have a white tip on your tail. Willard is for the barn where you were born. Brown is just pretense. The hyphen is putting on airs. You are sly, Tippy. I always suspected it." He purred loudly, curling his claws and smiling. "I am so famous a mouser that my given name and my humble birth are always overlooked. If you doubt Crow and me, why don't you go around to the front of the house and look in, and see for yourself?" He walked with flowing tail toward the barn. Miss Hickory was unable to move for a space. She watched Mr. T. Willard Brown swinging his sides and disappearing at last through the wide red doors of the barn. Then she walked slowly away from the lilac bush, the corncob house, and her basket of berries. She skirted the garden, crossed the lawn, and came to the pink rambler rose trellis beside the front porch. Up the trellis she climbed, braving the sharp thorns, up, until she could peer underneath the crack of the windows where the shade was not completely pulled down. Blue rocking chair stood empty and still. The fireplace was boarded. The family Bible on the center table was folded carefully in a white towel. The shining brass pendulum of the grandfather clock hung motionless, and the hands pointed to 8 o'clock. It must, by the shadow of the lawn sundial, be noon now. The old farmer's almanac had been hung by a loop of string on the wall, and it was gone. She had been alone without knowing it for some time. She knew now that everything that Crow and Mr. T. Willard Brown had told her was true. Her head would have whirled if it could. She felt too weak to hold on to the rose trellis, but she backed slowly down. Mr. T. Willard Brown was waiting for her, having come softly around the corner of the house. "Well, there you are, Miss Hickory," he purred, "2 of us in the same fix. Why not come over to the barn with me? It is to be kept open all winter, and I have been offered a permanent position as head ratter." "I wasn't born to live in a barn," she told him desperately. "Well, where then?" he asked. "I am going home," she said. "Today I shall finish my canning." "Home?" he smiled. "Amusing that. I just passed your house and it was occupied. You know, Chipmunk, of course, who lives in the stone wall and has been so spoiled with gifts of peanuts that he expects to be supported. He has moved into your house, Miss Hickory. I should say that he is there for the winter. He was finishing his dinner when I saw him, and your basket of berries." There's the hat with Miss Hickory. Well, I wonder if it's true. I wonder if Chipmunk has really moved in for the winter. And if so, where is Miss Hickory going to live? She has a real dilemma, doesn't she? She's been left alone and she didn't even know it. So what will happen to Miss Hickory? We'll come back tomorrow for part 3, chapter 3 of Storytime with Miss Leah as we read Miss Hickory. The name of the chapter is Mackintosh Lane. So we'll find out what happens then. Bye-bye.